All right. Hello and welcome everybody for the Cloud Native London. Cloud Native London is 2nd of February. of the 2022. So the beautiful date, beautiful day for another meetup, another learning. Hopefully today will be very, very fruitful meeting, and you will learn something new. Like always, if you would like to join us and discuss with other people, feel like on the real meetup. This is oishare.com/r. You will go to the Rambly when you can create your virtual avatar and feel a little bit like in the game, but meeting with the real people, have some conversation. So if you want to, be a heckler and to constantly comment what is happening, or you want to go hang out with the cool kids, you can go to the oishare.com/r, or you can find the link on the down below, if on our Twitch and YouTube. So without delaying further ado, I think we can go today. We can really start. So welcome again. Is a Cloud Native London. Today we have only one speaker. Will be our Nick from Ondat, and I think what we will be doing today, because I do not want to leave everybody, without like a hungry for more knowledge. So Nick will give his normal presentation, then will be a set of questions like always. And I think after that, if would like to, everybody would like to stay and see some live demo, Nick was happy to stay longer and to give us some presentation. So I'm really stoked for today for everybody to see what we can do. We are a strong, open, diverse developer community dedicated to the cloud native platform and the technologies right now in London. But because we are in the magic times, we right now virtual. So welcome everybody who is from London, not from London, from UK, or basically all over the world. Welcome everybody. Hopefully you will find something interesting today for yourself today. My name is Hubert. I'm the host for you tonight, and let's get it started. First of all, I would like to say big thank you to our sponsors, what are helping the whole everything going. And there is not only this presentation, but also a lot of the magic things what are not usually seen behind the scenes, and help us to keep the cloud native London going. And hopefully when the whole the situation, this as someone referring human malware will finally will be gone, we can go back finally on the real meetups with the real humans to talk. So I think so. Let's start with David from Palo Alto to shout out for his awesome company.
Good segue into malware. Of course, Palo Alto Networks, known in the security industry as helping customers identify that. Dave McLean. I work within the Prisma Cloud division of Palo Alto Networks, which is all about cloud native security. And we help customers secure the cloud native workloads. Some of you will know some of the acquisitions we've made, such as Twistlock, for example, in the container security space, and also likes of PureSec as well in servers. We help customers secure the entire lifecycle of their images. For a couple of years, we've also been looking at things like the Kubernetes app YAML code and understanding whether there's any misconfigurations in it. We've got a variety of different solutions. Our latest workload-based solution is a image analysis sandbox, which allows you to look for more dynamic threats in an image before you ship it. So rather than just looking for vulnerabilities, we also can look for any dynamic threats, use of processes, networking, and passes and paths, and so on. So, that's what Prisma Cloud at Palo Alto Networks is all about. And thanks, Hubert.
Thank you, and I am looking forward to hear more about this sandbox, because that sounds like product what it's something what I will be very interested to look after. But now I think it's time for Zen from Circle CI.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm Zan, developer advocate at Circle CI. We're the leading CI/CD provider out there. So whatever you're building, whatever you're deploying, wherever you're deploying, we can help you out. Best of all, we've just completely revamped our free offering. So no credit card, no nothing, just builds and deploys and tests so that you can run it for like 100 hours and do all of the things that you had to previously pay for, like Docker layer caching, private orbs. You can use things like runners to run builds on your local infrastructure, sync with the cloud, all in our free tier with unlimited friends. Basically, it's also open to teams. So yeah, check it out if you're interested. And yeah, happy to be supporting this meetup.
Happy to have you here, Zan. Yes, Cycle CI really is a really big game changer. I can confirm that they have a really good product. I'm not saying that because they are sponsored of the CNCF meetup, but I'm saying that this is because I was involved in to use the product, and I am pretty happy with it. And unfortunately, from people from SysDic, unfortunately, they do not join us today, but I will give them a little bit shout out. SysDic is driving the secure DevOps movement, empowering organization to confidently secure containers, Kubernetes, and the cloud. SysDic is the software as a service platform built on the open source stack that is included Falco and the SysDic OSS and open standards for runtime threat detection and response. Again, really good product. I try it. I tried to open source version of SysDic on the early days when the Kubernetes and was not even version 1. And yeah, that was it. Till now, this is one of my favorite tools to not only do the security diligence, but to track what it's happening and why something, for example, mine do not work. So yes, thank you very much again for all our sponsors. Thank you. You know, big bows, and we can move on. So for our lovely audience, now it's a little bit shout out. We would like you to participate with the 4 small questions, nothing important, nothing big, but if you would like to go to the ourshow.com/p or use one of the links down below of the stream, of the video, please join us. There will be a few questions about you and the question from the Nick about, so we will know a little bit ourselves better. We will try to we will try to understand each other, but as you know, again, nothing nothing horrible, just easy questions. It's fine. Everybody should have a good time with it. So again, ourshow.com/p, or you can use the link below the streams. Let's give them 1 more minute so more people can type it, or if they use any mobile devices, so they can they will have a time to go and click and if they would like to, because we want everybody to participate and join us in our jolly team. Okay, I think we can move on. So first question, is your first time in the Cloud Native London? No, and 25% on yes. That's a lot. Usually we have more balanced, and today in February we have a lot of returning people. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody who decided to join us again. Welcome everybody who is here first time. Really thank you for finding time and join us here today. Okay, there is balance. Maybe I will give it 1 more minute. Maybe we'll change. We'll see. we'll see. I'm feeling like, it's just like this like an auctioneer, it's just like we have a 33% for first one, we have a 33% for the second time, and no, 40%. I say the 40% for first one, 40% for the second one, and 40% sold. I think we can. So in the end, we have a nice mix of the people who are returning and the new joiners. Welcome. So now the best one. Tell us from where you join us. Again, this is Cloud Native London, but right now we are virtual, so you can join us from anywhere you would like to. You just pin it on the map where are you located. So whatever is the closest place for all jokers, what they decide to drop in the middle of the oceans. Yeah, no. You can change that to correct yourself. But we are winning with the United Kingdom, probably London, because it's Germany. Oh, guten Tag. I think we have a Swiss as well, and so guten Tag as well. No, I oh my god,
French, I guess, too, right? Bonsoir.
Bonsoir, exactly. I say it's a challenging because the guten Tag is like a normal normal greetings, but there was the one for the afternoon. But I think the most common one will be the hello. So
Grüß Gott.
I think there is even Belgium.
That Belgium
or Holland.
Netherlands.
That I need a stronger glasses. It's just time going by, and it's no longer deniable that I need a stronger glasses. Yeah.
Can't swim, can you? No.
Okay, I think we have a response. We can move on. Please move on. Hey, try to describe what your job title is, and try if there is one of them. Please choose one of them. If it's other, I would like to hear from you. You can drop the name in the chat, in the YouTube or Twitch. I would like to hear what is the other, because that's the last month we have a very interesting person who claimed that his job is to destroy the Kubernetes cluster for fun and profit. That was pretty funny. And so if you have a very interesting job title, please drop on the chat in the YouTube. I'm currently looking on it, so please. I'm curious what might be interesting. Usually we have quite a nice mix, but we have right now we have mostly architects, backend developers, the SRE DevOps engineers, which is always strong representation, which is very lovely. Security engineer, always salute to the security engineers. The jobs is really. They're always in this weird position when that whatever they do, someone will be not happy because they stopping production. Or
their job is to say no, right? It's the no sayer.
Yeah, it's always this ridiculously hard position when you are responsible for something. And a lot of the people do not only not appreciating, but try to avoid even to talk with you because you will it's just like, we have a plan, we have a schedule, and then the security engineer shows up and everything is now all plan is gone. But yeah, so I always say security engineer, besides of the SREs, it's what they have to wake up in the night usually, or they have like a ridiculous schedules of works. Security engineer is this one of the positions where they definitely have a lot of my respect. It's not that to have a bigger than anybody else, but I appreciate because I appreciate everybody. But but also I would like to say the security engineer is this one, the one what I always look as the most interesting. Then we have all this. Now there's a 20%. Again, if you would like to let us know what is your order like position on the chat on below on the YouTube, please. But if we do not have any update anymore, I think we can move to the question from Nick. No one want to share? All right, I think we can move on. So question from Nick: what database or message queuing system do you see the most fit for the running in Kubernetes? That's a very interesting question. I would like to see before I will give the Nick question about, I will drill down a little bit about this question. Let's see if what the people will choose.
Can they like freely type for others, or do you?
No. So if they choose others, they will have to type, for example, in the YouTube chat. So
okay,
that's why I'm looking a little bit on the corner here, so because I have a chat open, so to see what my shows up. So if someone choose others, please drop the information. We would like to hear from you. Okay, there is a Postgres. Okay, so that is a good question. Who choose Postgres? And I think we have an update from previous question. What is your other position? Is the master student from NCI Ireland. Welcome. Hopefully you will find something interesting. Cloud native is the one of these things what I definitely is open and very interesting. Again, I learned about I was reading about the Kubernetes when there was version 0 something. When you have to compile everything by yourself, was fun. So definitely now is much easier to entrance and do the good nice research.
Do you have any answer for others?
No, so we'll wait. Let's give the few maybe one more minute to people to drop on the chat. What's the order? And the Postgres disappeared right now, which is very interesting. So people change their mind. Okay, so what's the order? If you be so kind. In the meantime, I think that this is a little bit stabilized. But Nick, what do you think in the meantime, when we're waiting for people to reply, what they think it will fit better? What do you think might be there?
There's a couple of other databases. I just put some of them because I thought that was the most used. But I think as long as you have the right operator and the right management of that operator, it's okay. It can be anything. But I was really curious if other people can say, look, I don't see any database. Why would I run a database in Kubernetes? Right, this kind of thing. But apparently people still think, and I think it's a good thing because I believe that you can run stateful systems in Kubernetes. Actually, the question behind that one is, are people ready to run stateful application inside Kubernetes? Because we've been running a lot of stateless application for years now. But how about stateful application, which basically is the component, stateful component part of the application, because every application at some point is stateful, right? Mm-hmm. You need to write to a persistent database, or even message queuing is part of your application landscape. But it's good to see that people can run even Kafka in Kubernetes. That would be fine. I'm guessing it's for maybe some ML workflows or stuff like that. That would make sense. I'm really curious about other. Please put a name.
Yeah, let us know. From my perspective, I will be saying something controversial, but what was the name? Cockroach.
TV. Yeah, actually, I I almost put the name. I was like, there's already 4. So
yeah, Cockroach DB was really, if you want to, that's pro tip for everybody else. Pro tip is very nice. For example, if you want to run Postgres and you do not very deep into Postgres, like features, then you might like it. Yuga DB, which is, they took like 70% of the Postgres data code, and they adapt the cloud distributed storage underneath, which is very interesting. It's again, but there is no 100%, feature Postgres features, but it's much more advanced in this way than, for example, cockroaches. Cockroaches, they try to do the little bit their own thing, and that's good. Don't get me wrong. It's it's no good or bad answer for that. But for example, you said, Nick, that depends on how you trust operators. And this is, I think we're going back to the question, how you trust the operator. Because, for example, with Postgres, you have it's very hard to have active sharing. That doesn't matter which, if you have multiple instances, for example, with the operator, you have this main one and and a lot of the secondary read-only secondary ones.
Yeah.
So this is, for example, one of the really Postgres problems. So Cockroach kind of solved this, and Yugabyte solved this as well. When you have the form of 3. But yeah, unfortunately, I do not have any update. But I think that another database, what you might think of, is Redis. Redis is database.
Yeah, true.
And
I guess MySQL can be an easy one as well. Postgres, MySQL can be easily run in Kubernetes.
To be honest, the question is a little bit questionable, because, for example, I running Postgres in Kubernetes without the issue, and I do not have a problem if, for example, for reasons the application will be down for 2 minutes because the Postgres needs to restart and the DNS needs to be propagated. So again, everything depends of what you're running, if you know what I mean, because I think this is the biggest one of the biggest challenge to convince yourself that what it really needs to run 24/7. And I think that this is good to question how to convince the teams they do not need the 24/7. Then maybe adoption of the stateful applications will be easier for the Kubernetes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That
stateful application has they have a lot of constraints as well. So not necessarily stateful set, all that, you have to be careful.
Everything depends on what you want to run it. That's the bottom line. All right, then. I think unfortunately no one will share on the YouTube chat what's the oldest, so I think we can move on. I will stop sharing my screen. So Nick, if you be so kind and share your screen, please.
Yes.
All
Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it. So let's wait for YouTube to catch on. I think
there's delay.
Yeah, it is like 10 seconds of the delay, but I think we are fine. So whole stage is for you, Nick. Go ahead, please.
All right, thank you, Hubert. So let's get started. So first of all, thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm very stoked to be there. I mean, being able to talk to community is very useful, because I think I learn as much as I'm trying to teach people. Unfortunately, it's still virtual. So hopefully we're going to be to a stage where we can finally meet physically in London. That would be great, and share some pizza and beers. So the talk for today is going to be focused around DevOps gone wild, implementing policy as code with Kubernetes. And essentially, we're going to be talking about automation gone wrong in Kubernetes. So we're going to be covering CRDs, operators, and how to, or should we put guardrails for DevOps people so that we don't have this sprawl of resources and uncontrolled Kubernetes just everywhere. And if we do so, how to do it and how to do it properly. When I say properly, I would say in a Kubernetes way. We're going to take a look at different options. So for the talk, that's about 30 minutes. So it's like 20, I'm going to try for 30 minutes, right? And then we're going to have, if there is question, we're going to answer the question. And then for, some time, if people are happy to stay, I'm going to go through a couple of demo. Actually, the code snippet I have in the end for the policy example, if people are interested, I can show you live, how to do it, a couple of syntax, how to like in the cluster, in a pipeline, there's a lot of different mechanism to make it work. And I'm going to be focusing on Kyverno for the practical thing. So if you want to learn about Kyverno, you can stay a bit longer. So a little bit about me before moving forward. So I'm Nick Vermandé. I'm working for Ondat. So quickly, Ondat, we are a startup and we do provide distributed persistent storage and volumes for stateful application. This is why I asked you, what do you see, as a database for, just running ideally in Kubernetes? I've been working with Kubernetes about the past, which almost from the beginning, 6 years. Before Ondat, I used to work for Cisco, also 6 years, where I also focused on various, cloud native aspects of software-defined networking components, so mainly the CNI plugin within Cisco. I've always been an automation and DevOps junkie, especially automation, because I'm kind of lazy, but we are all lazy. I think all the sysadmins, and if we can automate something, even if it takes us like 12 hours to automate like a 1 hour task, we'll just do it because we don't have to do it manually again, right? So yeah. Personal life, I really enjoy Japanese anime, Marvel comics, and metal as well. Okay, let's get started. So first of all, if we take a look at Kubernetes, in terms of a journey, you discover Kubernetes, it can be complex very soon, and essentially at some point you're like, okay, I have half of the picture there, but I need to put a lot of effort. I need to put a lot of glue myself to take one application or some component and migrate them to Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is very opinionated in terms of how you should inject, secrets, config map, how you should wrap your application around the Kubernetes resources. And there's a lot of resources out there in terms of documentation, but when it comes to your own application, it can be very difficult to find what you need on the internet or with your colleagues. And basically you have to experiment. And over time, there's a lot of different solutions that can help you deploy application and tools within Kubernetes. So today we're going to be talking about operators mainly, but also Helm chart and any sort of automation that is automating Kubernetes. So Kubernetes has a lot of automation, and moving forward, what we are doing is essentially automating the automation, automating Kubernetes automation. So operators, Helm charts, customize, which is now part of kubectl command line as well. All of that basically inherits the risk of automation gone crazy. So DevOps gone wild means automation gone wild, because automation is at the heart of Kubernetes. And now that we have all this ecosystem of tools that allows you to deploy any application like you would, on your Linux machine using apt-get, or, on your Mac using brew, in Kubernetes, now you have a package manager. But the problem with this, it's creating a mess. You know what you install, but you don't necessarily know what are all the resources that are installed. And most of the time what I see with customer is like they have a lot of resources just staying forever in a namespace. No one knows what they are used for, like secrets, config map, or special CRDs that they don't know about. So we have a sprawl in terms of resources that get provisioned in Kubernetes in an uncontrolled fashion, as well as a sprawl of tools to manage Kubernetes, right? And this is because Kubernetes is fundamentally, it's not simple. It's a complex distributed system. So people need help to deploy and manage the lifecycle of those applications. So for example, we were talking about a database, right? So it's good, you can deploy a database in Kubernetes, but how do you manage the application? How do you manage the database? You can deploy the database as a stateful set in Kubernetes, but Kubernetes will just manage the stateful set. Who is going to manage the application layer, the database, and how? Right? Because there's no native tools in Kubernetes that helps you manage your database. And for this, we're going to take a look at what an operator is. But essentially, an operator will help you manage the additional application layer that sits on top as Kubernetes as a platform, right? And of course, once you start automating things and installing things, again, we inherit the problems of automation at scale, which is the blast radius. And how can you reduce this blast radius? Typically, well, you have to put some guardrails in place, whether it's part of a CI/CD or CI pipeline, or if you have any manual check or people doing PR and PR getting reviewed by the security team. I mean, there's different way to do it, but I believe, in 2022, we have a lot of tools to automate all of that. And we're going to take a look at a couple of solutions that mixed together can really help you reduce this blast radius. Of course, other risks like security breach. Again, if we talk about database, how can you ensure that the right permission are set in place inside Kubernetes? I mean, it's not part of a standard, you're not going to configure the database as part of you configure as a human being, you configure the database settings. It's not going to happen this way. You're going to configure a tool that sits in Kubernetes, and this tool is going to configure the database. And how do you control this tool, right? It's not how do you control the parameters of the database, it's how can you control the tool that manages the database. And ultimately, because Kubernetes is more and more used as an automation system, by using, Kubernetes is super extensible. The API is super extensible, and basically you can use Kubernetes as an automation engine to deploy resources outside of the cluster. So typically, if you look at a project like Crossplane and others, type of project like that, where you can use Kubernetes extension to create objects in Kubernetes that represent resources in AWS, for example. So you can create a EC2 instance just by using a piece of YAML and just deploy this in Kubernetes. Again, how do you control that? Because ultimately now it's not the surface, it's not only Kubernetes, it's Kubernetes plus everything else, right? Because it's automating AWS, Google, your on-prem DC if you want. So how can you control this before it's, the configuration and the automation is effectively applied in the cluster? Because once it's applied in the cluster, it's too late, right? The command is gone, it's already ingested by Kubernetes, and Kubernetes will just do what you have told him to do, right? So, or told her, or told it. So it's, we need to put, in my opinion, we need guardrails there. Another risk is because you want to go fast. It's a DevOps world where you have short iteration cycles. You want to focus on speed, but if you don't have the right tools, the right security, the right permission, the right tooling in place to control all the elements we talked about, as well as your code, well, in the end, you're going to be delivering an application or piece of code where the software quality, actually, you were thinking by adopting DevOps and Kubernetes, it would be higher. But in the end, you end up with a poorer, software, which is definitely not the objective. Those are all the risks. So what are some, things we can do against this, or, to constrain those things going crazy? So first, I would say, as usual, what I see is people going to Kubernetes with an old organization, like not DevOps ready, still teams that are siloed, these kind of things. That doesn't work to begin with. When you go into this kind of DevOps world with Kubernetes, you have to adapt your team, because with microservices and responsibility for particular, part of the software, you end up with smaller teams, and all those smaller teams will themselves, they will own some component. So if I take an example, again, like with a database where you store your data, before microservices, usually you had a big database for your whole application. But now, because they are kind of scattered with microservices, you end up with every team as its own database, as its own tool. So you need to organize your teams in accordance, aligned with this kind of new way of just writing code and just the new practices, right? If you don't have that, this is going to fail, and obviously security and all the control in place cannot be implemented and enforced. So always people, processes come first. Change people habits, change processes in terms of how you deploy application, how you create CI, things like use tools directly in your repo to do syntactic check, or security like SemGrep, all those check directly in your code before putting your code in, not necessarily in production, but even in testing. So you have to adopt all those paradigms before thinking about going seriously into Kubernetes at scale. And you don't have to implement everything. Like if you migrate to microservices, maybe you don't have to put everything as a microservice. Maybe you can redesign a bit of an application, or maybe you don't need a full CI/CD pipeline with GitOps and everything. Just focus on what brings value for the business, and with this incremental progress, then you will end up with a better picture. Right. So this was for the business side of things. Now, technically, there's always three components, right, for successful technology adoption. There is people, processes, and the technology itself. So how can we put guardrails inside Kubernetes when you start to automate a lot, using a lot of CRD, using a lot of resources that are managed by very different people, and probably you have permission are too broad. Like when you start, usually permission are too broad. So you need to have some guardrails in place. So the first one is GitOps. So I'm going to cover those two topics, GitOps and policy as code, later on in details. But for now, remember, GitOps is one of them. It helps you get more secure. The process is also more, slick. And also you can keep track of things a lot easier. Policy as code, finally, this is the one that will tell you, okay, maybe, I'm a developer, I want to deploy some database, and I want to have 5 gig, but I've in my YAML file, instead of 5 gig, maybe I put like 5 terabytes. How can I prevent this person to deploy a database of 5 terabytes? Policy as code can help you do this by controlling the YAML manifest and just using the native Kubernetes paradigms like validation, admission controller, validating webhooks, or mutating webhooks. But we're going to be talking about this a bit more in detail. So don't worry if what I'm talking about doesn't make sense at the moment. We're going to see this in detail. So, and this spread of resources at the very foundation, as I was saying, is because of operators. And this is the way you install application in Kubernetes right now. Everyone has an operator, whether it's a solution like Rancher on the hood or database. You have a lot of database that you can install with an operator. Just go on operatorhub.io and you're going to see there's plenty of operators. But what is an operator and how does that work? So an operator essentially is a mix of two things. So a custom controller. So in Kubernetes, by default, you have a lot of controller. A controller in Kubernetes helps you control the number of replicas you have. For example, for a pod, if you say, I want 3 replicas, the job of the controller will make sure that the declarative way of doing things, so I'm just going to fill my YAML file, the API will just ingest this. This is declarative. It doesn't guarantee that this is going to be created for you, right? But the Kubernetes controller is going to make sure that what is living in the cluster is conformant, is aligned with your intent. So what is inside the API. So it's natively in Kubernetes. There's a lot of controllers there by default. So as the API is super extensible, you can create custom controllers that watches the resources you want. And based on this active monitoring of those resources, then you can take action. It's like, it's just an automation engine. And this is why I was saying Kubernetes can easily be used as an automation engine, because we have controllers, right? So we have this continuous loop. The custom controller will continuously monitor resources in Kubernetes, and based on resource, CRUD, so create, read, create, read, update, and delete. Based on those, what you do, right, it's going to be maybe creating a resource in Kubernetes or in somewhere else. So this is the first component, have a watchdog that continuously watches for resources. And in the case of operator, those resources are custom. So by custom, I mean that they are not native to Kubernetes. So for example, you can create your custom resource that matches an EC2 instance. So an EC2 instance has a name, IP address, VPC, all that you can represent as a schema and tell Kubernetes, okay, this is for me, this is what represent an EC2 object, or this is what represent a database install, right? And those custom resources will be installed in Kubernetes. And the moment they are living, the schema is living in Kubernetes, people can start creating those objects. And the custom controller, for example, when you see a creation of a database install custom resource, is going to install that database, taking the configuration from the custom resource and just deploy that. If the person updates the YAML file defining the database, then the custom controller is going to change something in the system, right? For example, you can tell him, I don't know, this is how I'm going to configure my backup for my database, right? And essentially it means that you can extend Kubernetes both in terms of the resources and the capabilities, because natively Kubernetes cannot take a database backup, right? And the problem is now those custom resources, they are not standardized, right? So you can see at the bottom, this is where the custom resource are living, and anyone can create its own, right? So it's not necessarily standardized, and everything you install will add custom resources. So you can easily end up with those hundreds of new resources that are not native to Kubernetes and that are not standardized. But still, you need to find a way to implement policies to reduce maybe the size of those resources, I mean, the number of those resources or what they contain. And how can you apply a policy on something that is kind of random? Well, it's difficult, you cannot, right? So we have to find a way to do that. And there's a couple of benefits from operators for, of course, it simplifies the deployment, scale out, scaling of all your cloud native applications. So we mentioned database, we mentioned, whatever tooling system that works. It automatically performs operation because the name fits well, right? It's an operator. It's replacing you as a human being, right? You don't have to do all those manual action on top of the Kubernetes native objects. So for example, if you scale your stateful sets in Kubernetes, you're just scaling the number of pods that you have. You don't scale the number of database instances. Well, the operator will make sure that once the new stateful set has been created with the image of the database, is going to make sure that the new database instance maybe will join the new cluster, will have the right permission, etc., right? So it's super useful. And also it can enforce compliance by design. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you create a user on your database with the operator, let's say the admin user, and you set a couple of permissions, after you have installed the database, if you try to manually change the permission inside the database directly, the controller, your custom controller, will see that, oh, wait, the state, this database has changed. So let me revert back to what I've been told, right? So this is only, I mean, it's partly solving the problem because what the database operator controls is kind of limited, but for some aspect, it by default is kind of applying and enforcing compliance, because what is right, the single point of truth, it's the definition, the custom resource that is sitting inside the cluster, rather than the imperative command, you trying to change the permission. But of course, there are kind of downsides to that. So as I was saying, there's no standard for CRD by design, right? It's a custom resource definition. So it's like bring your own schema, right? No way to control that. Sprawl of custom resources that can sit there doing nothing, or maybe you think they are doing nothing, because there's another issue, which is the supply chain quality control. So you can install any operator in less than 5 seconds, but you don't necessarily, actually my point is, if you install an operator, try to, control or take a look at who the operator provider is, what it's installing, go through the documentation, because you can easily install something that can be harmful for your cluster. So in the supply chain, like where is the software that I'm installing in my cluster, where is it coming from? Is it something secure? Is it something that has been checked by, any CI process that validated there's no security breaches? All these kind of things are really important for CRD, because once it's there, it's there. No one will take it. And custom resource validation for compliance and best practices, this is something that you need to build. If you start using CRDs, you have to document it. You have to create your own best practices, because if you try a couple of tools, you're going to see, probably like me, it truly lacks documentation, because the schema sometimes is huge, but every customer, every user will have different use case. So you have to practice a lot. You have to test what's working for you. And in the end, you have to document it, because it's just not existing. Okay, so I was talking about the two mechanisms to get more control on those operator and resources in general, but I really want to insist on the CRDs, because this is what is kind of polluting your cluster. Like the native resources, that's okay. We all know, how to manage them. You can manage it just with GitOps. It's fine. A pod is a pod. A stateful set is a stateful set. It's not going to change tomorrow. The schema is the same. But for CRD is different. So, but GitOps can be applied to whatever, resources. Can be CRDs, can be pods. It doesn't really matter. So what is GitOps? I'm just trying to introduce it very quickly. So GitOps is a special sort of CI/CD pipeline. At the beginning, it looks like the same as usual normal pipeline. You start as a developer, you have your application code, you commit, you push your code. The CI pipeline will trigger a build. Probably you're going to change the new tag in the container image, these kind of things. But then what is going to change is how do you deploy that application into your cluster, right? Into your Kubernetes cluster. And this is where things change a little bit. So instead of like manually using kubectl and manually connecting to the cluster and deploy the application, the first thing is you need to automate the generation of the manifest depending on the image, your new image name. So you want to change the image name in your Kubernetes manifest. Maybe you want to change other things, the number of replicas for test compared to production. You will have specific components and configuration items depending on the target environment, whether it's production or dev, test, etc. So customize is great for that. Or you can use some CI, some GitOps tools will help you build those manifests as well, like Flux. You can create, Helm charts and things like that. That works too. And the idea is that those manifests will sit in a Git repo as well. So it doesn't have to be the application code repo. It can be another repo. Probably it's best to be another repo. And now this is where the GitOps pipeline starts. You have a tool, a GitOps tool like Flux or Argo that is deployed inside the Kubernetes cluster as an operator. Again, and the role of that operator will be to monitor some manifests that are sitting inside, Git repo, monitor those repo, and based on what changes on those repo, deploy or remove, or do some action inside the Kubernetes cluster. And it's not a push, it's a pull mechanism, right? I'm pulling the manifest when there is a change. You never log in as a user, you don't log into the cluster. So suddenly you reduce the attack surface, or the security surface of Kubernetes. No one's logged in Kubernetes to install application. This is a GitOps pipeline. Right. So this is a best practice, and I really recommend everyone running Kubernetes in production to adopt GitOps pipelines for your production application. So as a result, you have a single source of truth, which is Git, because what is in Git, this is what is deployed in the cluster. You have better security now, because no one is using kubectl, only the GitOps solution that is going to deploy this inside Kubernetes. You have a history, so you have versioning. And now, if you think about it, all those manifests is just YAML, it's declarative. So you can start using syntactic check like OPA Gatekeeper or Kyverno and do policy as code, right? So, and this is a good transition. GitOps plus policy as code will give you this kind of double, win-win to implement those guardrails. One, put everything in Git, pull model, don't push, don't use kubectl, that's one thing. And on the other hand, whatever sits within those repositories like manifest, and those manifests can be, as I said, can be native object for Kubernetes, or can be CRDs as well, right? So that works too. So you can control what is sitting in those repository, every field from every CRD. You can choose to, if this is not compliant, Kubernetes won't deploy it. And we're going to see how to do that. So, but yeah, the idea of policy as code is really to decouple the validation. Right? So the validation is really policies. You write policies ideally in YAML, right? Because this is native to Kubernetes, but some policy as code that don't allow you, for example, OPA Gatekeeper, you have to learn a new language, which is Rego. It's super flexible, but it comes at a cost. The cost is getting more complicated, right? But there is another learning curve. You thought you were done with Kubernetes. I've learned Kubernetes. No, you have to learn Rego, right? That's another thing to do. So, but still, it has to be a declarative format. Then, again, I said, preferably YAML. Can be Kubernetes or more generic. So Kubernetes means that you can use all the Kubernetes schema. For example, if you want to limit the number of replica, then you can go to, what is it, like spec, whether, template, or you can go through the Kubernetes schema and find the item you want to limit and just create sort of regular expression using the native Kubernetes schema and just YAML definition, right? This is what I mean by Kubernetes. And it also allows you to control and validate the source before committing to the cluster, which is really interesting. And there's two ways to do it. Either you can run this syntactic check as part of CI pipeline. You just add a command line. I'm going to show you this later. Or you can just commit to the cluster, the policy. So the difference is like the policies are just in a file and you check those policies against the repo, right? Nothing is living in the cluster yet. Right. And if it's a yes passed, then you proceed with the GitOps pipeline. If it's a fail, then you stop. Or alternatively, you can just create policies themselves as resources in the cluster. And it's when deploying the cluster, then you have the validation webhook that will from Kubernetes that will say, I'm going to deploy it in the cluster or I'm going to stop. It's a different way of doing the same thing. Once it's before committing to the cluster or directly inside the cluster. So a couple of project that does that, OPA Gatekeeper, we have Kyverno, Daytree, and others. This is quite a good area at the moment. You can find a lot of innovation there. And in terms of the principle, it's super easy. I mean, super easy. It's just hooks inside the cluster, not before. So here the workflow when a pod, for example, is plan to get provision inside Kubernetes, it goes through, or any resources go through a step, several steps. And within those steps, you have mutating admission, validating admission. And this is where you can hook in your policy as code. So this is Kyverno, and Kyverno will just propose an engine, right, that can be hooked into the mutating admission or the validating admission. We're more interested in the validating admission for today, which is if it matches, if it satisfies my policy, right? So it's going to go from API request to validating admission. If it fits my policy, right? We have the policy controller, the policies, etc. If it fits the policy, I'm going to proceed and say, yeah, it's a pass. And then Kubernetes will proceed by, writing the object in etcd, and then you will have another controller, like the deployment controller, will say, oh, there is a new deployment that I need to deploy this number of pods, etc., etc. And then you can continue. So it's just a bump in the wire during the workflow. So quickly, a pipeline example where the idea, and I'm going to show you later after the question, we have a lot of time. If you want to see it, I'm going to show you how it works. But the idea is that one, you have a base manifest, you have, so the definition of your CRD. So for example, let's take the example of a MongoDB custom resource, which is going to be provisioning a database. You can have a deployment, stateful set, and a MongoDB. You can generate the manifest using Customize. And then you can use a tool like Scaffold or anything really to deploy into your Kubernetes cluster. And what you can do is, as part of the CI pipeline or as part of a command line or when deploying into Kubernetes, you just tell the system, okay, let's ask Kyverno. And Kyverno, by creating your policies, it's fully in YAML, super simple, will check whatever policy you put in place, will go back to your Scaffold tool or to any other pipeline tool, and will just say yes or no for particular resources, and those resources will or won't be deployed inside Kubernetes. I've put some link there if you want to test the policies, but now I'm going to show you a couple of them to show you how easy that is. So it's just CRDs. The Kyverno policy themselves are CRD. And what I like about Kyverno, there's no need to learn a new language. So for example, here, this is the MongoDB. I want to require those permissions. So whenever I want the user to create, when deploying a new database, a user admin must be configured. And one of the roles that are associated with that admin at least one of them need to have all those permissions. Right. And this is part, so spec, user, name, roles, all of that are part of the CRD. It's not a new language. It's just the path of the field of the CRD, as easy as that. And another one, for example, which is quite important, is in terms of storage, like PVC size. You don't want people to be deploying 1 terabyte of storage or 200 gig of storage. Maybe you say, no, maximum is 10 or 15 gig on the test cluster. When I tried it, I was like, yeah, it's going to be, this is a string. So it won't be able to interpret like, like inferior, less than. But actually, it does that for a string. So just by doing this, right, I don't do anything special. I have the policy is just, okay, the pattern is part of the normal Kubernetes path, spec, stateful set, volume claim template. It's just stateful set definition, normal, native. And storage, okay, instead of putting a value, you say my policy, I want it to be less than or equal 10 gig. As easy as that. You just apply the policy, and then any pod that doesn't match any kind, so any MongoDB community CRD that matches this will be able to get deployed. For every one of them that doesn't match that, then it's not possible. You will be declined the access to the cluster. And just one last one. This one is, for example, for Ondat, right? We manage replication for your backend storage. And again, simple, YAML file where you just interact with the storage class, native object, where you find parameter, replicas needs to be more than one or equal than one to ensure that whatever you deploy in production will have at least one storage, one volume that is replicated, one replica that is active for your persistent volume. All of that. Super easy. It's a lot easier than Rego because, well, it's just YAML and it's super flexible. So my advice, I found it really amazing because it solves so many problems very, very easily. So maybe you may have some corner use cases where you can still use Rego for very complex things, but I've tried a few a bit more complex than that, and it's super easy, really, really perfect. So that was it for today. So hopefully you know a little bit more about policy as code, how and why you need to do it in your production cluster. So DevOps at scale inherits the same risk as automation at scale. So manage your Kubernetes cluster the same way you manage your automation and the way you validate Terraform and all of that. Kubernetes operators, that's great. You can use them. They provide more automation for operation, but at the same time, the downside is you have to put more control if you don't want the sprawl of custom resources, which lead to the same thing. Remember at the beginning of VMware, all of that, people were starting to deploy VM everywhere, and then it gets a mess. And then you have to have the security guy that comes in and say, no, this is not compliant. This is serious here, right? You cannot do that. And obviously guardrails are required. As we said, first one, GitOps, help reduce manual interaction with the cluster, increasing security, improving compliance. And the second one, policy as code, enforces best practices, not necessarily compliance, but also help you enforce your best practices as a team, not necessarily about security, but just good practices, healthy practices for your cluster. And compliance rule for before workloads are deployed in the cluster and at every stage of the application lifecycle. All right, that was it for me. So hopefully it was useful. And again, so now I think we are up for question. You can read through it. It's just if you want to learn about Ondat. But now I think I'm done. So we can start with questions if you have any. Share something about certificate security. So what certificate security? Like you will have to be a bit more specific. What do you want me to share? Like how to install custom? It's not easy. Like anything related to certificates inside Kubernetes. I would say you do it once, but it's easy to do it once. But the problem is typically if you want to rotate your certificates, this is starting to get complex, right? But I don't think like policy as code and all of that applies for certificates. It's I would say it's a special kind of resources inside Kubernetes. But yeah, best practices, replace the default certificate, use your own. Yeah, so I would say it's good to avoid self-signed certificate, but challenges, to maintain all those, certificates over time. Probably I'm not the best person to tell you how to rotate all that. I'm not a PKI guy. I just know it's a mess and it's not easy, but it's not necessarily specific to Kubernetes. So, but what I can say is probably try to have, when you create users in Kubernetes, always try to get proper keys and proper certificate for them, like proper ones, not just self-signed.
Yeah, that's I think what I can we can say in terms of certificate security on Kubernetes cluster. Other angle, what I was thinking of it is that how to have certificates on applications, if you know what I mean. And I
so install it for, in that case, to be honest, like Ingress, install your wildcard certificates on the Ingress and that's good. Right? On this side of things, if we're talking about the application, I think having an Ingress is the best.
Going a little bit more secure way, you can have a wildcard on your internal Kubernetes cluster. For external, try to not use the wildcards for and
excellent. Yeah. Sure.
There was some very interesting attack using the wildcards certificate. So if you do not have to, don't use it. But for like an internal, that's a good thing. If you have an internal domain, and this domain, and for example, and you use the any kind of cloud provider, in terms of like
KMS?
I don't think AWS Road 53, for example, with API.
Yeah.
So you could create the DNS challenge for Let's Encrypt. So even if you have a database, if you have a Kubernetes cluster completely inside of the it's nothing from outside what is reaching it, like inside the VPN, but you're allowed to connection to the AWS API. You could have a nice, you could obtain a valid Let's Encrypt certificate for your internal infrastructure, which is very handy, to be honest. Because dealing with the self-signing certificates, sometimes it's fun. That's what I want to say. And in terms of rotation, I think that the only option it is to have good writing operators, even your own ones, because you will die very quickly if you do something. What I can tell you that, for example, when the certificate expired, even if
revoked, right? Or if you want to revoke them, it's
the certificate was renewed, but the application was not reload, and this was LDAP.
Oh wow,
that was fun. And as you can imagine, LDAP was controlling the access to the VPN.
It's like cutting the branch you're sitting on.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but that's the real life problems, and don't be shy. Let's not be shy to say that they might happen. Any more questions? Maybe someone would like to. If you would like to raise the question for the Nick, maybe I should say it in the first place. You can go to the oishow/p, or you can choose the link down below for the polls and responses. It's oishow.com/p, so you can raise the question for the Nick. Are you still happy to stay a little and do a little demo?
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
All right. So. What we can do now, I will again, if you want to have a question for the Nick, please use the link down below. Is oishow.com/p, or you can use the basically on the link what you see on the screen as well. But the easiest one will be oishow/p. And in the meantime, I will leave that page, and I will. You can do the presentation, and if the question pop up, and hopefully
just tell me. Yeah, that's fine.
Then we can go back and we can have a conversation about that. So let me stop sharing. So please,
let me bring my. Okay, can you see everything?
It's still starting. It's taking off. And we'll take off.
Okay, so I'm going to explain what I've got here. So it's basically the application I've used in the talk, where I have a couple of manifests to deploy my application. So my application is basically composed of, it's a two-tier app. The front end is just displaying it's using the Marvel API to display Marvel characters under the form of cards, like randomly on the screen, right? So we have the front end. The front end is just Flask application. The Flask application is connecting to a 3-node MongoDB database. And I have a Kubernetes job that is effectively requesting the Marvel API, sending requests there to get, I think that's about 600 different entries or 1,000 entries, something like that. And the job is installing them in the DB, and Flask is just retrieving the DB elements and displaying them with a nice framework on screen, right? That's basically it. So this is the app. Now, you need manifests for this app. So you need to work out, when you deploy a Kubernetes, you start developing a Kubernetes application, you start with a different container, and then you create the different YAML files to build your application. So in my case, I've got the job, I've got the front end. So the job, again, requesting Marvel characters, registering it into the database. I've got the front end, right? Which is a deployment in Kubernetes. I've got the service, the Kubernetes service, right? So I've got the deployment, I've got the service on top for the load balancing, obviously. I'm deploying a database for that application. So therefore, I'm not going to deploy this manually. I'm using the MongoDB community operator for that. And because I want to deploy it in a, more, I would say, production ready, or if I do it in test, this is this whole thing about shifting left, what you have in the end, like you want to test, you want to do your smoke test or your unit test, maybe with performance in mind. So you maybe want to enable encryption to see what's the difference. So it's bringing all the tool sets into your kind of, when you're developing locally on your K3S cluster. So you have the same tools, like replication and security is not only in your SAN, it's also in Kubernetes, and this is what is there. It's just a storage class where it's like overloaded with some component like replication, encryption. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different manifests to apply. So typically, soon enough, if you start developing an application for Kubernetes, you're going to find out that you need to repeat the same thing again and again. If it's, I'm going to deploy it into the test cluster, into the prod cluster, into the staging cluster, every time you have to enter the same command. How can you facilitate this? Well, you can use customize. So if you're not familiar with customize, it's fine. I can describe you like in 10 seconds. So customize, the principle is super easy. You have base manifests, right? So it's really like the foundation to build an overlay on top. So it's the main resources, like you have to have the name, you have to have some parameters there. It's just the foundation. This is not what is going to be deployed into the cluster. This is what is going to be modified by customize to render the final manifest. So it's like a template, but this is the base for the template. And then you have all the modification, which we call the overlay. So then you can create environment. So for example, I can use the same base, but then I will have a different overlay for dev, a different overlay for prod. So for example, if you look at the deployment, maybe in prod, in dev, I just want 2 replicas, right? Maybe in prod, I don't have anything in prod, that's fine. But maybe in prod, you want, 6 or 10 replicas, and then you're going to change it into the overlay. Another thing can be, MongoDB. MongoDB here, base, I've got 4.2.6 version, but maybe in prod, I don't want this. Or maybe in my dev environment, I want to change it. I want 505, right? And remember the permissions before, like as an admin or as a security, let's say a DevSecOps admin, you want to have access to this repository so that you can implement those overlays. So this overlay means that, okay, those roles need to be in place. You can define what you want there. It doesn't guarantee that someone is not going to modify it. It just guarantees that as the foundation, it's there. But then what people does with that, you don't necessarily control, but at least you can, the security team or the DevSecOps guys can enhance the overlay with their own requirements. The requirements, they won't be enforced at the moment, but they sit there in a declarative model. This is what is going to be generated by customize at the end, right? So it's very simple to use it. You can use different way to use it. Like you can use customize build, like the command line. So where am I here? I can maybe show you. We have the manifest here. If I go into the overlay, right, here I can do customize. Fields, and then just the current directory, I believe. This is customization. Sorry. Oh, I need to go to dev. Here you go. If you do just customize, build, and this is the rendering of the manifest, right? So on the screen, I took the base manifest and I've used customize to basically customize those manifests. It can do like nice things like auto-generating secrets, or config map, all of that. It's super powerful. So that's the first step. But now our challenge is we have all this rendered as a file. So typically you can use kubectl-k, and if I just run if I record this in a file, if I save this into a file, kubectl-k and dev, then it's going to do the same thing as what I just did, but it's going to deploy it into Kubernetes. This is not what we want to do. We want to have a pipeline that will tell us, is this conformant with my policy, right? And let's use Kyverno for that again. So Kyverno, simply, we have, in the same way we have a dev environment for the application manifest, I have development policy. So remember, we had this one. Oh, by the way, for the storage part in your MongoDB, your database has to be less than 10 gig. You need to have at least one replica, right? And there's two ways to do it. Either you deploy Kyverno inside the cluster and you apply the manifest to the cluster, and the cluster is going to tell you, okay, I've deployed this, but not that. But I would say it's already too late. What you want is personally, my personal opinion, it should be part of the pipeline before the GitOps process take those manifests and deploy them into Kubernetes. For that, Kyverno propose a command line, right? So the command line is basically this one, right? So it's kubectl. I think I still have it recorded. kubectl. That one, I believe it's in that one. So kubectl-kyverno. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is the command line, the one that is quite interesting. So you do the same thing as before, right? Customize, build, overlay, dev, which is just going to generate the manifest in the standard outputs on the screen. And then you use Kyverno, kubectl-kyverno apply, and then the policy you want, the dev Kyverno, right, policy, and this -- resources -- right? So it's going to take as inputs the list, all the manifests, and check against the policy that you have defined. So it's just everything is happening based on files. Nothing is happening in the cluster. This doesn't need a Kubernetes cluster, right? You can run it as part of the pipeline. So if you check, I've just built a super dumb script that tells you, okay, where am I? Is it dev or prod that I'm going to be using the script with to pick the right policies? And then I'm just going to run the exact same command and check the result of the command, right? If the result is 0, so like it's a pass, otherwise it's a fail. The command line will give you exactly why it failed and which resources are failing to comply with the policy. But my script is just going to tell pass or failed. And then based on that result, you can go to the next step of the pipeline, which may be deploy those manifests into the Git repo so that the GitOps engine can in turn install them into the cluster and deploy your application. So let's test it, right? So I'm going to be modified. So to just checking if right now I'm conformant. So I'm just going to run. So we see this is dev, right? All I want to apply to check against all the policies that are under the dev directory. So passed, right? So it's fine. I've got everything there. So my manifests are basically okay. So now let's check in my customization. Remember, as I said, the DevSecOps doesn't have control on the end result, on the rendered template. But let's assume that now someone is getting, I don't know, I'm requesting 100 gig, right? So I'm just changing the file, nothing more. So normally right now, failed, right? Because it's not conformant to my policy maximum size where I've said storage is less than 10 gig. Again, I didn't use Rego. I didn't use anything special. It's just Kubernetes. By doing kubectl explain and the CRD, you will find that this is exactly the path to the storage definition. So it's a copy paste from the CRD schema, nothing more, nothing less. Now let's change it back to 1 gig. No, sorry, this is the policy. Let's change it back to here to whatever, 10 gig. This is passed. Now, same thing, like for someone forgot to enable, like I'm going to my development cluster, but I need the replicas because I have critical data. I still need to have at least one volume replica, right? So this is on the, in that particular case, it happens to be Ondat. There's other solution that does provide replication of your persistent volumes. It just happens that in that case, this is Ondat. And maybe, so let's just again, this is failed, right? So this is working perfectly. Or more critical, as a security person, you want to encrypt all your volumes. You should do that, right? Kubernetes doesn't do it for you, doesn't encrypt the volumes. Your PV are not encrypted. So you want to enforce people encryption. Again, let's check we have the right policy, which is there. So here it means that any storage class that has Ondat, so it's going to check against any storage class that has Ondat in the name. It's going to tell you if it's the policy fails, it's going to pop up that message. And again, if you look at the resource, it's the pattern is parameters, storageos.com, encryption true. If you look at the storage class definition in the overlay, it's exactly this: parameters, storageos.com/encryption, copy, paste. It's damn super simple. And now, so if I change, so I've put it to false, right? Already, it's yeah, there false. So again, it's going to be a fail. If I change it back to true, then it should be a pass, right? So I think this is the best way to implement this because it's just binary, pass, fail. The other option, if you CRDs in the cluster, I don't know, did I install them? I believe I've installed them. Okay, so you can see here those policies.kyverno, et cetera, what you can do as well, what I was mentioning is you can do in dev, you can also apply the policy. So remember, I've just checked it via file and using the command line for, without a Kubernetes cluster. If I think I've already applied them. Yeah. So now I've applied those policy in the cluster, the require encryption, require replicas, it's applied in the cluster. Those custom resources, I can do like now kubectl get cluster policy. I can do this. YAML. So it's exactly a mirror of my YAML file, right? That's the policy object within Kubernetes. So now if I want to, that won't work because yeah, I'm missing the MongoDB operator in my cluster. But if I was to deploy this, no, sorry, it's not the right scaffold, this one. So if I were, is going to fail, right? But at some point towards the end, it's going to be the same thing. I'm building the image. I'm replacing the container. I'm using customized. So scaffold is using customized to create the manifest and then apply it to the cluster. But there, if you have something that fails, because Kyverno is implemented in the cluster, if, for example, if the tool, the CI tool, didn't create one replica or a database far, above 10 gig, then the validation webhook in the cluster will give this to Kyverno, and Kyverno will, in the same way as the command line, will say, no, I have a policy that says it needs to be inferior to 10 gig. But the problem, if you do it inside the cluster, then it becomes inconsistent because some components of your application will be installed in the cluster, like the ones which are basically conformant with the policy, and others, like maybe the storage part, won't be applied. So you end up with a weird situation where you have the error. So it's some of the part of the application couldn't be deployed in the cluster, and part of it could. So you don't want to be in this weird situation. You want the check being done before deploying the cluster. So therefore, I recommend like the command line, the kubectl Carveno plugin, so that you can compare the policy as YAML to your YAML definition for your application. Right? I think it's a lot better this way. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you guys. So I don't know if there is any question, or if you want to see, discuss anything I've mentioned today.
Not from the audience, but if you would like to, you can use the allshow.com/p or the link down below. But I have a big question. You showed that it's fail or pass, but is it possible to get information why?
So again, what was the question?
So you know that you changed I want to have 100 gigs, and it shows up the validation failed, but it's just saying failed.
But you can. It's because it's in my script, right? So, or you want to see the result like from the command line?
I would like to know why it's failing. Why it's failing.
Oh, sorry. Let's put 10 there. I'm always changing. I don't want to change the policy. There. So let's put 100 gig, right?
Yep.
And let's do something before. I just want to check that it's a pass still. So it was this one, I believe. And it's not this one. Man, I'm lost in the. What is this one? Yeah. Okay. Or failed. Why is it failed? The encryption. I still have the encryption. No, it's not the encryption. It is true. One. True. I don't know. We're gonna check.
I think now is a good idea. Why it's failing?
So I need to pipe the customize. So I need to go back into my customize with it here, right? So it's there. So I need customize. Or let me build Kyverno. And I need the command line. So I'm gonna go back to my this one. Wait a sec. Yeah, this one. So this is gonna work on this one. I have it. It's custom. Let's start this way. Yeah. So this is the command. So it's customize. I'm just checking at the same time. So customize build. It's the full path to my dev overlay, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm piping this into the input of Kyverno, and I'm going to apply the dev policies to it. Okay. Right? So let's check. Okay, so applying 4 policies to 7 resources, total number of result count may vary, blah, 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 to check the policy requires replica, resource default, storage class, Ondat replicated flayed, validation error, number of replica must be greater or equal to 1. It's probably because I didn't save it there. If I run it.
Nope.
No, why is this? It was working before. Maybe I put it. So what did I do differently? Maybe check for replicas. Number of replica must be greater or equal. Or I change. Yeah, I think again I've changed the policy. I believe. So it's 10. This is why.
That's what I mean about
I kept changing the policy. So now look, I've got 1, no, pass, 4, fail, 0. But of course, you cannot have this as part of a pipeline. Pipeline should be 0, 1. So let's try another one, right? If I encryption on my false, right? I'm building the manifest again with customize. Fail 1, check for encryption, validation error. On that encryption must be enabled. Rule check, blah blah. Fail at. It's and if let's do several, right? Yeah. Let's do this one 0, and let's try maybe at the same time. What do we have here? Like 100 gig. So what is going to say? So 3 fails, and it's going to list all of them. On that encryption must be enabled, number of replicas must be greater or equal to 1, and PV size must be less than or equal to 10 gig.
Okay, perfect.
And what I found great is, as you know, you can use, the only thing you need to know is the path to the resource from the root of your YAML file. And you can use, I don't know if people on the call are familiar with kubectl explain, but if you, this is a quick tip, right? If you do that, look, if you add -- recursive, it's gonna give you all the schema, right, of where you want to start. So in that example, I've used explain pod spec container env. So basically, what are all the options to put env inside Kubernetes, not the reference, but env. So it's going to tell you, okay, you can do this, and you have from there to the bottom, you have all the different field and resources you can use. It also works with CRDs. So if you can pinpoint what object you want to limit or to apply the policy, the only thing you have to figure out is copy paste here and find your logic. So here is very simple logic, but what you can do if you go to the Kyverno documentation, you can build dependencies between things. So if you have that particular number, or if you have that particular field that is set to that, then the policy is this. Otherwise, the policy is that. So you can start building more complicated policies until a certain point where, if it's really complicated, then this is where Rego may be more useful. But for all like basic or let's say medium complex situation, this is Kubernetes. You don't have to learn Rego. You don't have to learn anything more than kubectl explain and find your custom resource you want to apply the policy onto, right? So, and yeah, when I discovered this tool, I was like, wow, that sounds good, because now, especially for us as a company with Ondat, because we are providing all the storage class and all the options, how can you enforce that your critical stateful application has the right, configuration? This is an easy way to do it.
All right. All right. I believe, thank you very much for that. That's very, there was a very extensive talk.
Yeah, I think luckily we didn't have it was only me, but hopefully, people learn one thing or two, and I was really excited to do that. I'm very passionate about this kind of stuff. Solving this kind of issue is really great. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So let me take care about the screen. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. There was hopefully that you learned something new about this policy when the Kubernetes go wild. Hopefully you find something new, and you learn something, and you can use for your daily basis, for your you can use this knowledge and implement it to your infrastructure, and find yourself more secure basically, and more compliant.
Yeah. And if you have any question, you can reach out to me, on Twitter, LinkedIn, just you can ping me, or if you want to learn more about data on Kubernetes and all that, we remember there's the community is DOK, Data on Kubernetes, which is also part of the CNCF and everything. So we have a Slack channel there as well. Really open, a lot of students, a lot of people there talking about database, stateful set, policy, all of that. So more than welcome.
Perfect. All right. If you would like to join us as a speaker, please join us on the cloudnative.com. You can contact Cheryl. We're looking for speakers. If you would, basically, yeah, I think that's it for today. Our next meetup will be on 2nd of March. So please book your time for yourself. That there is, if you don't want to remember, YouTube can remember for you. That you can click the one of the reminders. If you like what you see, leave the like, subscribe, and leave the comments down below. Thank you very much for everybody for joining. Thank you very much, Nikki, for very extensive, very extensive conversation. And yeah, I believe that will be that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night, and hopefully see you on the next one. Cloud Native.